Lando. All right, let's take a look at Lando Norris's Spanish Grand Prix. I'm very excited to get into this. This is going to be a full analysis on just Lando's race, mostly comparing him to Verstappen, of course, but really just focusing on his strategy. And let's get started with his start, because this is, I think, where a lot of people are going to say he lost the race. And I don't necessarily agree with that. So he did not get a bad start, okay? If you look at Verstappen's onboard, Lando actually gets off the line first, and he only starts losing ground to Verstappen when he starts to move over to try to cut him off, right? Verstappen and Lando get about the same start, but if you're coming across at an angle, then you're going to be losing ground to the guy behind you, right? So he comes across, Verstappen just gets his nose in there just enough so that Lando can't completely push him off the road. But then once Norris straightens out, he actually starts pulling away from Verstappen. So he's only losing ground when he's cutting over like that, especially at the very end of that initial start. He really swerves over and he seems to lose about a meter there. Keep in mind the grid slots are only 8 meters apart and the cars are 6 meters long. So he only has to lose about 2 meters over the course of that entire straight for Norris or for Verstappen to get a nose in there, right? So he didn't have a bad start, right? So the only way he could have got ahead of Verstappen is if Verstappen either had a much worse start or Lando had an amazing start. It's kind of hard to tell if that was an amazing start for Lando or not, or if it was just average. He never bogged down at any point. He didn't seem to have any tire spin, so it seemed normal. Same with Verstappen. So there's nothing, he didn't lose anything there, right? It was just, they just had equal starts. So the only thing he could have done is if, as a strategy, he had decided to say pure straight from the beginning and say, I'm not going to cut over, I'm just going to go straight and then try and go the outside of round one or corner one so that I have the inside of corner two. That's a strategy he could have chosen, but it's probably not a good idea to give Verstappen the inside line, right? He's probably going to cut corner two off for you. So, and if you can get over, like if Verstappen did have a worse start and you can cut him off, that's a guaranteed way to stay in the front. So that's obviously the best way to go. But once he moves over, he can't then decide, oh, I'll go straight and stick it around, right? He's already made that decision. So the other option he had would be, uh, or rather, the Russell aspect too. A lot of people are going to say, well, what if he had stayed in his left lane? Then Russell wouldn't have got through, right? And that's not really the case either. The only reason Russell got through was because Lewis had a horrible start. So remember, Russell's in third behind Verstappen on the right side. Lewis is behind Norris on the left side. Or sorry, Russell's in fourth. Lewis is in third, and Lewis is a horrible start. So in a normal case during that race start, you have Norris, Verstappen, Lewis, Russell. In a normal case, Russell and Lewis get going. Lewis is going to block Russell. Russell's not going to be able to get around to the outside. But with Lewis's horrible start, that's what gave Russell the path to go around. Even with the slipstream behind Verstappen and Norris, Russell's never going to get around them unless he can get out, uh, unless he can get ahead of Lewis, which just didn't happen, or which did happen. So okay, so after the first corner, you have Verstappen in first place, Russell in first place, Verstappen in second, Lando in third. So let's go into the first stint. So end of lap two, start of lap three, Verstappen gets past Russell. And I saw in the commentary, Crofty said, oh, it looks like Lando's falling behind a little bit. Because after that first lap, right, you've got Russell ahead, Verstappen right on his tail, and Lando was over a second behind. He had lost the DRS. And if you look at the times as well, that's not true either. It's more a case of Max driving into Russell than it was a case of Lando dropping back from Russell and Max. Lando was only 1.3 seconds behind Russell when Max overtook Russell, and by the end of that lap, he had already gotten within DRS, so he had gained 0.4 of a second. So he was actually keeping with Russell for those first couple laps. It's just that Max went from being like half a second from Russell to Max, and then half a second to Lando, to Max driving right up to the back of Russell away from Lando, then overtaking him. So then there was that second gap between Russell and Norris, but Norris never fell back. But then Lando gets stuck behind Russell. So Verstappen is in front doing high 120s, like 120.8, 120.9, couple 121.0s. Lando's stuck doing mid 121s, so about 0.3, 0.4 seconds per lap slower. And he's stuck like this all the way until lap 16 when Russell pits. So Verstappen is gaining. Like I said, 1.3 seconds was the gap between Lando and Max, right when Max passes Russell. That grows to 4.5 by lap 16. So, and as we'll see at the end, that's really where I think the race was lost, which raises a big question. How did Max get past Russell right at the end of lap 2, and Lando couldn't get past him for the entire 16 laps? It took Russell pitting for Lando to get past him. He never was able to he was never even able to mount a good overtake attempt. He was always like 0.2, 0.3 at the end of that straight, but always starting the pit straight in DRS like 0.8, 0.9 behind. And so how come he wasn't able to get past, but Max was? I think, honestly, the main thing is that none of the cars were really able to, right? If you look at the top 6 throughout the whole race, none of the cars changed positions, with the exception of Lando and Max. All of the top 6 stayed the same. They didn't, and especially on the same tire compound. That's the key too. At the beginning of the race, Russell and Lando are on the same age tire, same compound. So you've got no tire delta at all. None of the cars were able to make overtakes in that top 10, really. The only car in the top 10 that actually made any overtakes was Oscar Piastri getting past the Alpines. Other than that, I mean, he got past Sergio Perez too, but that's Sergio Perez. None of the top 10 were really able to overtake, and that's usually the case at this circuit. So it's more of a case, like I said, of Max just really outperforming Russell and Lando to get that overtake done as quickly as he did. If Max had let it wait even a lap or two longer, I mean, you heard GP come over the radio as soon as Max was in Russell's DRS, right after lap 1, and he said, this might be our only chance, which, looking at Lando Norris, was true. That probably was Max's only chance. So this isn't a case, as you'll see as we go through this, it wasn't a case that Lando had a bad start. Russell just got lucky with Lewis having a bad start, and Lando got unlucky with Verstappen having as good a start as him. But he didn't have a bad start. He also didn't have a bad first stint by not getting past Russell. He just got unlucky that Verstappen had a really good first sector, being able to get past Russell, because none of the other drivers made any overtakes either. So he didn't have a bad start. He didn't really have a bad first stint. But then we get into the overcut, and this is the brilliance of the McLaren strategy here, is the overcut. So when you have a situation like Barcelona where it's really hard to overtake, specifically on the same age of tire, there's really only one spot. It's hard to follow around the lap because it's such high speed. You've got the dirty air, so you got to somehow get close enough by the end of the lap to make that DRS work, but it's just tricky. The only way to really make an overtake work in a situation like that is to have a tire difference. So it's either a tire compound difference or a tire age difference, right? And that's where the overcut can really work. So Max pits lap 18, right? Lando doesn't pit till lap 24. So he goes 6 laps longer on those first softs. And when Max comes out of the pits on mediums, Max is lapping almost a second a lap quicker on those new mediums. Like, Lando is really pushing his tires past where they should be. And initially, this is actually a slower way to run the race. When Max pits, he's 4.5 seconds ahead of Lando. When Lando finishes his first pit, the gap is at 10.2 seconds. So he loses after that first round of pit stops. So he comes out, lap 25. He's over 10 seconds behind. So he's lost 6 seconds going for the overcut strategy. So you think, well, how is this possibly going to be faster? And at the end of the race, it's about the same time because you noticed having those fresher tires, he's able to catch up, right? So it's like, what's the point of going extra on the first stint, having fresher tires, and then catching back up? How is that really an advantage? And the only advantage is that it's the only way to give yourself a chance of passing, right? You need that tire difference to have a chance. If Lando and Max do the same strategy the whole race, even if Lando gets past Russell, maybe Russell has an accident or something, Lando's never going to get past Max. He's just going to be stuck behind him the way he was stuck behind Russell. Even if his car is slightly quicker, again, difficult circuit to overtake, there's just no chance of an overtake. So you have to risk falling behind and risk not being quick enough to catch up to give yourself a chance to get that win. And that's where I really think that McLaren's in a championship mindset, because they could have said, well, let's just run the same strategy, lock in third place, or maybe even, hope for second, maybe try it slightly different, maybe not as aggressive as an overcut to try and get second, but not risk a podium, right? Doing as aggressive as an overcut as they did was really the only thing they were doing was going for the win. Because after that first pit stop, Lando was behind Sainz, he's behind Hamilton, and he's behind Leclerc, right? So he's got to get through 3 cars now. And keep in mind, none of those cars could get past each other, right? And they knew that by the first pit stop. All of the cars had been in the same position. McLaren knew that overtaking for the top 6, top 7, top 10 even was extremely difficult. Yet they chose to go that extra 6 just to give themselves a chance at the win, right? Imagine if the tire delta with those 6 lap fresher tires wasn't as good as they thought it was. They could have ended up in 6th, 5th, right? Behind both the Ferraris, both the Mercedes. But they didn't, they took that risk, but they said it's worth the risk to go for the win. And that really shows, I think, the mentality that's happening at McLaren. All right, so stint 2 now. So we've done the first round of pit stops. Lando's 10 seconds behind. Stint 2, we're on the medium tires. Lando's lapping about half a second quicker when he comes out, because keep in mind, he's got 6 lap fresher tires now. Lap 31 to 35, him and Verstappen are lapping about the same. But this is during the time when Lando is passing Sainz, Hamilton, Russell, and mostly he was quicker during the initial start of his medium stint. That's when he got past Sainz and Hamilton. When he gets back up to Russell, he's now burned off some of his tires. So he does get stuck behind Russell for a few laps here. So that's why him and Verstappen, the times are the same, which is pretty impressive considering he's making it through traffic. Or not even traffic, he's just making actual overtakes. But at this point, he's not gaining any time. So again, he pits for first at lap 24. By lap 36, Lando's finally made it through the cars he fell behind, but he hasn't gained any time. Well, he's gained 1 second. So he's gone from 10 seconds to 9 seconds, and we're already at lap 36. So we're over halfway through. And on this strategy, McLaren's gone from 4 seconds behind to 9 seconds behind, right? So it just goes to show you how risky and how many things can go wrong with this strategy. It really we've got to have a driver that's making quick, efficient overtakes while preserving the tires, right? And then really hope that it all comes together at the end, right? So once he clears, so starting lap 36, 2 things happened. Lando finally clears the 3 cars he dropped behind, Sainz, Hamilton, Leclerc, and Verstappen hits traffic. So now Lando's in clear air, Verstappen hits traffic, they start lapping cars. And just close that window there. So Max hits traffic, Lando's in clear air, so Lando starts closing that gap again. He's going about half a second quicker from lap 36 to 44. Lap 44, second round of pit stops. So Max goes in on lap 44, or the start of lap 45, rather, and Lando pits 3 laps later. And this is because you might have noticed he goes 6 seconds, 6 laps later on the first round of pit stops. The second round of pit stops, Lando only goes 3 laps later. And this is because he's not far enough ahead of Russell. So as his medium tires start to drop off, he's got to pit earlier maybe than he wants to in order to come out ahead of Russell. Because if he gets stuck behind Russell at the end, he's going to have to make another overtake and further hamper his, the little progress he's made. So he pits lap 48, comes out just barely ahead of Russell. Just barely ahead of Russell, which is sort of fortunate, but it could also work against him because then that first outlap, he's forced to really push those tires, which can often take quite a bit of life out of them, especially near the end. So that, coming out, if he had come up behind him, he might have taken the time to warm them up and then get past him. But he comes out ahead, so is that a benefit? Is that a disadvantage? Not sure. The other thing is he put on a scrubbed set of soft tires, which means they had already been used in qualifying. So that might have negated the detriment of having to push them hard on the first outlap because they had already been through a heat cycle. So it might have not actually mattered that he had to push them early. But then at this point, it's lap 48, and it's just a straight shootout to the end. So you've got Lando on 3-lap fresher softs, Max on 3-lap older softs, and it's just pure pace to the end. He manages to close the gap from 8 seconds to 2.2, which, to be honest, seems like a lot. I kind of suspect that Verstappen's doing some pace management there. There was no, if you look at the lap times, there's no sudden drop in Verstappen's time. He was consistent throughout his final pace, but I suspect that he wasn't pushing as hard as he could. So, the 6 seconds that Lando gained in the last 18 laps might not be totally representative of how quick that McLaren was at the end. And that's not to take anything away from Lando, but if we're trying to be optimistic about the future here, that might be a little bit too optimistic. I think we got to keep it reasonable. So the obvious question after all of that, so end of the race, he finishes 2.2 seconds behind. Could Lando have won that race? It's tough. Like I said, going through all of this, looking at it lap by lap, I don't think Lando did anything wrong. I know he said we should have won that race. It was just a bad start. But again, there was nothing he did really wrong at the start there. There was nothing he really could have done during that first stint, except for, the only real factor here for why he lost was just Max Verstappen was able to somehow get past Russell, on the same lap old tires right at the beginning, and Lando wasn't, right? But nobody else was able to either. So I think the only way that he would have been able to beat Verstappen after being behind him after the start there was if he had gotten past Russell at the start. So that instead of being 4 seconds behind after the first pit stop, if he was only 1 second behind and then he gets that 6-second tire delta, maybe then he has a chance. But still, we saw how hard it was to overtake. Even if he was only a second, 2 seconds behind, after that first round of pit stops, that would have only given him, an extra 3 seconds. He finished 2.2 behind, so he might have had 3 or 4 laps at the end to try and make an overtake near the end of his 18-lap stint. And it was, on the third stint, his tires were only 3 laps fresher, not 6. So, at the end of 18 laps, I don't think he would have had that much extra grip than Max. So that's the only scenario I could see where maybe he had more of a chance than McLaren gave him. But honestly, I think this is just one of those races that just didn't go McLaren's way. Russell got extremely lucky at the start with the draft and Lewis having a bad start, letting him take the lead. That was just unlucky from McLaren's side. Um, and then the start was just a pretty normal start from both of them. I don't really think there's any way he could have maintained that lead. So yeah, that's my analysis. It's really interesting to look at just a single driver's race. I really enjoyed it. Let me know what you guys think. I'm going to be starting to add a little bit more in terms of visualization, so you can kind of follow me a little bit better. I'm going to work on my editing skills. Tell me what you want to see next for an analysis. I'm thinking of doing Hamilton next. I think he had a really interesting race, and then maybe Oscar because he also had a similar overcut strategy to Lando. And like I said, he did gain positions, including getting past Perez, which is something I'd like to look at. So subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Later.